Hey, Sherry, how are you?
Hi, good to see you. I'm great.
Good to see you. Good to see you. And thank you for your time as we are talking about, as you know, we are diving into our new teaching series called Living into the Beloved Community. And it is based off of Dr. King's philosophy of just that. What does it mean as a community for us to look at ourselves as beloveds, but really working together for the good and building the kingdom of God here on earth as it is in heaven? So today our teaching has been a bit heavy. We talked about our past and looking at the history of racism. And now we're looking at what it means to be an anti-racist. And some of this can be somewhat challenging and hard. So before I dive in, forgive me, tell me a little bit, can you just tell our guests a little bit about yourself? And then we'll dive right into that question I just asked you.
Yes, so I have been a member of the church since 2008, and I was on staff there. So I had the chance to work with Pastor Cheryl Jefferson Bell and Pastor Daryl Burton for a period of time in congregational care. So I was the director of counseling ministries there for about 7 years and have been a licensed therapist for about 10 years. I've recently transitioned and now I do coaching. Really focusing on helping people identify what they believe about themselves, and then how they want to express that in the world.
Nice. Okay. So just that, right? As a coach, right, we are aware that growth can be somewhat difficult, right? Can be challenging. So we can even get to a place of fatigue. And so let me ask you this: how can one care for themselves as we continue to have these tough conversations?
Such a good question. And we've talked about, you and I have had conversations about just the intensity of emotion that many of us are experiencing. And so that is when we're going through something, no matter what it is we're feeling, if it's intense or traumatic, the need for self-care just increases. And most of us aren't great at self-care in general, but if we're going through something, we really need to double down. And when we talk about self-care, we know the drill. We know it's sleep, it's exercise, it's eating well, it's water, it's time alone. But in this case, I would also add time away from the media. Step away. Ask yourself what you're needing. Are you needing time in nature? I think many of us need to just step outside and take a walk. So those are some self-care activities. But I really want to highlight one aspect of self-care that I think we overlook. That's really critical now, and that is the concept of self-compassion, which is really more about how you're talking to yourself as you're going through something difficult.
Yeah.
And self-compassion is the process of intentionally having a narrator inside that's greeting your emotional experience with kindness and compassion and validating it. So one simple technique of self-compassion is to just repeat the phrase, "It makes sense that." It makes sense that I feel sad. It makes sense that I feel angry. Whatever you're feeling is valid, right? None of us have really been through this moment before, and we're all having really feelings about it. And they're not all the same at the same time. And sometimes they're very confusing. I can feel horrible outrage and then excitement within the same minute, and so there's the roller coaster ride of that. And what we tend to want to do with intense emotion is escape it or minimize it or judge it or feel afraid of it and say, I don't know what this is and I need to get out of it. But I propose that in this situation, it's very appropriate to let it be here. I want to feel this intensity right now. I think the pain is appropriate to the moment and I want to be aware of it, but I want to greet it with compassion and understand that when I do that, it will have its time with me and it will move on and I'll get its message and I'll be transformed by it, but I can't hurry it.
That's a good point. I mean, so basically what you're saying is that don't ignore your feelings, right? I mean, if you're angry, okay, let's unpack that, right? If you're feeling somewhat convicted, right? Okay, let's unpack that, right? If you're questioning yourself, let's unpack that, right? I think, would you also say with change, I think one of the things as a pastor, right, and even as a former counselor, but now as a coach, we could also say that fear plays a part into that, right? Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
So much, yes. So fear is a big part of whenever we're going through something we haven't been through before, we're going to have anxiety or fear or trepidation, something that's unfamiliar. But what I would offer with that is that most of the things in my life that have turned out to be amazing, I was terrified of at first, or I had to go through some mustering of courage and step out in faith to allow God to use that to expand me, to expand my heart, to expand my life. So I think in these times right now, what we're being asked to do is acknowledge that the fear is there. If it is, not everyone's feeling fear. I don't want to presume that, but if you are afraid, acknowledge that that's part of our wiring, right? The alarm system that's saying danger, danger, that's okay. Just say I'm afraid. But we also have the capacity, because God created us with this prefrontal cortex, to say, I can be afraid and I can choose to do something anyway. I can be uncomfortable and I can move in courage and step out in faith and trust that I'm meant to move forward and move through the fear.
You know, you remind me of a personal experience that I had when it came to fear. If you mind me sharing, because I think it speaks into this. Back in 2016, you know, both my wife and I, we were doing our grad work, and she was in the social work program at the University of Oklahoma. I remember one evening she had asked me to go with her on a night out to see one of her cohort colleagues, her friends, who was doing, they would call it an open mic, where they would read poems and talk about their lives. And you know, what was significant about this night was that it was part of the LGBTQ plus community. And this individual who I had met, her name was Paula. She was in the process of transitioning, and so I had met Paula, a great individual, great soul. At the same time, though, I remember when my wife said, "Hey, will you go out here with me to go see Paula?" I said, "No, I'm exhausted. I'm tired." Right. And, you know, at one point she kept on pushing. She's like, no, this is a date night. You're going to come out here with me. I say, I am tired. And she says to me, I don't think you're tired. I think you're uncomfortable. I think you have been always uncomfortable around Paula. And of course, I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm not afraid. Why would you say that? I'm not uncomfortable. I am a pastor. I love all people. Right. I see the beauty in everyone. Right. I'm not. And I kept on really wrestling with this, right? And then finally, I said, fine, I'll go with you. But I'll be honest with you, Sherry, as I was driving with her out there, I was terrified because I couldn't really come to that place of acknowledging, yeah, I am uncomfortable. And what is that? Is that okay? Is that wrong? Do I feel bad for doing? And so we get out there and we are seated, and there was someone who was sitting to my right. She's sitting to my left. She gets up. She goes, I'll be right back. But then I watch her walk, and she sits in the front of this show. And then meanwhile, I can't get out because everybody's already, you know, I got people to the left of me and to the right of me. And yes, again, my fear creeps in, my emotions creep in, and I'm really struggling. But then all of a sudden, something significant happened. I began to really surrender myself in that moment to hear, to listen. And as I was doing that, it really changed I felt convicted. I felt angry because of what I was holding on to, this narrative, this fear. As I heard this individual's story, Paula's story, I heard her life. I heard the way her family treated her, the church, the way they treated her. And I was just in tears by the end of the night. And I had to make a decision, right? That am I going to hold on to my biases, my fears, my prejudices, you know, and still put on this facade, allowing that to paralyze me, or am I going to release that? And really, we've been talking about it all day today, is look at everyone in the image of God and divinely, uniquely created in the image of God, right? Where I can learn something from my sister, I can learn something from my sisters and brothers in the LGBTQ plus community, you know? So it was really a significant moment for me.
And a beautiful story and illustration of exactly what we're talking about. There's so many layers to that, but your initial sort of resistance that was kind of vague to you. You weren't exactly sure why, but you knew it was there. And I think when we talk about fear, maybe that's what we're talking about. There's this resistance. There's this, I'm not that, I'm not racist. Don't tell me that. I'm not privileged. I'm not, you know, there's this sort of immediate pushback that we may not even be 100% sure why we're pushing back, but it has to do with sort of the reordering of our own sense of identity. Like, how can I be this and that? And so that's the discomfort. But I also love this story about your wife, because to me, this is the story of her love and investment in you and the spiritual growth for you. And so there's M. Scott Peck defines love, I think, in his book, The Road Less Traveled, as the willingness to invest in the spiritual growth of another person. And that's what I see happening there, is that your wife knew something. And I think that's what we're being asked to do in following you and following these leaders of color who are teaching us something. Like, you're investing in our spiritual growth by teaching us. So if we can get past the discomfort and move away from the resistance and say, what else can I learn? What am I willing to just hear by trusting these leaders?
Amen. Well, Sherry, I have one last question for you, and it's really what I ask all my guests. But we are doing now the work of anti-racism, right? We seek to be a community, a church of that is going to be anti-racist. And so, as a coach, as a former counselor, you have all these gifts. What encouraging words can you give us as we continue to? Yes, we are in the moment, we are in the present, but as we look into the future, knowing that we seek to be this beloved community.
Yeah. Well, I'm in humble student mode, and that's what I'm going to encourage, that people who look like me and feel like me and want to learn are just remaining in that place. And also just being willing to make mistakes, be willing to get it wrong, be willing to have these conversations and know that you may be corrected, and that's okay. We just need to take those steps forward. The other thing I'm trying to remind myself is that when I feel this panic, that I'm awakening to something that I want to change and fix, and there's so much that I want to do and learn, and it feels overwhelming, I'm really reminding myself to commit to a lifetime so that I am not in a hurry. There's an urgency to get started, but once you start, then slow down and take it, marathon, not a sprint, right? Yeah. Really commit, so that this isn't something that we collectively sort of immerse ourselves in and then get burned out and overwhelmed with, and we just can't sustain it. So that's, I think, encouragement to me that I'll just share, that I'm trying to work on myself. It's like, take it slow, show up accountably and committed.
Amen. Amen. Well, Sherry, again, I'm grateful for your time. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your words and wisdom as we continue to grow and be committed to the work of being the beloved community, but also being an anti-racist community and church. So thank you again for your time. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.